All right, let's start with just column 1. What did we learn about our author? Paul. All right. All right. Anything else we learned about our author?
Slave.
Yep. So he calls himself a slave.
Slave of God.
Of God. That's important. That's right. Because he's not a slave in an economic sense, right? Slave, you can think of, right? So he's identifying, I belong to God. He's my master. I serve him, right? Yep.
Apostle.
He's an apostle. And kind of a...
Of Jesus.
Of Jesus, yep. An apostle means sent one. Because if you were to look in Acts, you'd see in this story, right? He was directly commissioned by Jesus. The living, resurrected Jesus met him and was like, I'm giving you a mission to go. So, yep.
He does not lie. God does not lie.
Yep. So God's kind of our capital A author behind it all. You're right. And so he doesn't lie. That's good. Yep. Thinking about our human author here, which God is obviously speaking through. Anything else?
Commissioned.
He's been commissioned. Yep. And what does he feel like he's been commissioned for?
To proclaim faith to those God has chosen.
Yeah.
And to teach.
Yep. So he's called to proclaim faith, right? Mm-hmm.
Teach.
And teach.
It's almost an impossible question if you stop and think about what Paul did.
Oh yeah, he did a lot, didn't he? But the big bucket, right, is he wants to speak the truth of God's word, right, for faith, right? So that's, is there anything else we learned about Paul?
This particular case, he is commissioned to believers.
Yep.
To teach believers.
Yes, you're right. So that's kind of, so maybe I'll put that in the purpose, right? A focus on teaching believers. And we'll dig into more why he feels like believers need to be taught, but yeah. All right, what about our audience? What do we learn about our audience? Yep, so it's written to Titus, right? So it's not written to a whole church, which is unusual, right? Most of the time he writes letters to whole churches. Now, there's a good chance maybe this would have been read to the whole church so they know Titus has Paul's backing, but it's written to Titus, which is kind of unique.
Believers.
What?
Believer.
Yeah, and kind of believers going to secondarily, yep. So what do we learn about Titus and the audience were?
He left him on Crete.
Yep. So he's been left by Paul on Crete.
To complete the work there.
Okay, yep. Mm-hmm.
He's considered Paul as son in the faith.
Yeah, so Paul views him as a child in the faith, right? So there's a good chance that maybe Paul brought him to faith, right? Mm-hmm.
He was to appoint elders to guide them.
Yeah, and that's kind of part of the purpose, right? Is Paul wants Titus to appoint elders, right?
Well, wasn't that what he was left on Crete to do?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yep. And so that's part of kind of the purpose of him writing the letter is to remind him, hey, remember what I left you to do, right? So, mm-hmm.
This is to teach right living and to do right living.
Yeah, so right living, some translations put godliness. So, yeah, there's this particularly strong emphasis, right, in this book on calling believers to godly living, to righteous living. What's going on that this is such an important purpose?
The gospel interpretation and instruction.
Yep, so he wants to teach them right living, which is in line with the gospel. But why? Why does he have to do this? Sorry, maybe Mary Beth and then Louis.
There's false teaching going on currently, must be in the churches.
Right, so it's to combat false teaching. Yep. Louis, did you?
There's division over legalistic minutia.
Yeah, there's division, right? Where did you see this idea of like division over minutia in the letter? Do you remember like what sections in it made you think that? Because I think you're right.
In chapter 2, boy, could I find it, where it sounds like they're arguing over things like genealogies.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Well,
9.
in 10,
That's 3:9.
in 10, it says that they were arguing whether salvation, circumcision was necessary for salvation.
Yeah. So 110, you've got this circumcision party. We'll talk a bit more about them in a second, right? But yeah, then a little later in chapter 1, we're talking about genealogies and what things are clean or unclean, right? Jewish myths. So there's a lot of division over, it sounds like, probably some type of Jewish beliefs, right? In fact, the division's so bad that Paul has to say towards the end of the book, right, for a person who stirs with division, 3:10, after warning him once then twice, have nothing more to do with them. Like, if they just won't stop being divisive, they're done. They're gone, right? So this is clearly a problem. Is there anything else other than kind of this false teaching? And we'll see how probably appointing elders is meant to kind of help with that. But is there anything else that's a problem going on?
So would you do, like, I look at the purpose as the main thing.
Yep.
So would some of those be underneath the purpose headings? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so yes, I think it's really helpful to try to summarize like what's the main purpose of this letter in like one sentence. Right now I'm just thinking like, let's throw out all the things that are going on that are making them right. And then maybe later we could think about how would we summarize that? Because you're right, probably a lot of these you could group into certain categories and say this is what it's all about. So you're right. So maybe I'm using the word purpose a little differently than in the past, but it's just more like what are all the things going on that led to the writing of this letter, and then we can try to summarize it. So any other thoughts here?
I mean, there's other things that he expresses that, like you need to teach the people these things. So
Yep.
my guess is because those things were a problem.
Right. So can you name like one or two?
So like old men, old women, how to teach
Yeah.
others and how to live their lives, and as well as submitting to government.
Family dysfunction, biblical dysfunction.
Yeah. Yes, I'll put in family, community, government, right? So he's seeing some problems here that need to be addressed. And that's actually a really good point, Mary Beth, that sometimes you can figure out what's going on, not because he says it's going on, but because he's like, well, if he keeps saying this, like if he keeps talking about godly living or right living, well, it's probably because it's not happening, right? And in fact, he kind of gives it away when he says, I mean, this is kind of a strong statement. In verse 12, chapter 1, one of the Cretans, a prophet of their own, said, Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons. This testimony is true. Right? He's like, all right, you guys generally have a reputation for not being great people, but now you're Christians. So we need to create a different reputation, right? So I think you can probably kind of boil it down to like there's these kind of two different main things. Like there's this problem of like lack of godly living, and then there's this problem of false teaching, right? And those are the two probably main problems going on, right? And you can potentially see how they kind of connect, right? Where if you have these people coming out of this Cretan culture that's very lax and lawless, you could see how some teachers will come in and say, well, the answer is we got to be perfect law keepers. And we just got to follow all the Jewish laws and then that'll fix everything, right? And Paul's like, no, those are both problems. Too much law in the wrong way is bad. Just living however you want is bad. We're going to call for a gospel kind of living, right? And so just to think of this for a second, like this circumcision party, right? I think that's the term that ESV uses in the translation. There might be other terms used, but if you look up that idea, they show up in Galatians, they show up in Acts, right? And it is these Jewish Christians, I think they really are trying to follow Jesus, but who were trying to teach that you have to keep all the Old Testament law and be a good Jew in order to be a Christian, right? And the church very early on says, actually, no, we're not going to require that. If you as a Jewish person want to keep obeying the law, you're welcome to do that. You know, you don't have to stop doing it because they do point to Jesus, but we're not going to make anyone do this anymore because trusting in Jesus is enough, right? And so that's kind of in kind of this background. So there's two problems of ungodly living he's got to correct, but then he's got false teachers who are coming in and saying the answer is just obey the law perfectly. And Paul's going to try to thread this needle to Titus and say, all right, Titus, you need to step up and be a leader who's going to help the church get healthy, right? So does that kind of make sense as kind of the context of what's going on here? And so now with this context in mind, we can read through the whole letter and be thinking about how does this help address a situation where there's ungodly living and false legalistic teaching going on. And with that context in mind, it'll help us better understand each passage we're in.
I think,
Yep.
to me, there was a third one. And
Yeah,
that was
sure.
the appointment of elders.
Yes.
Because
Okay.
that's really Titus's appointed job or whatever.
Yeah. So to appoint elders, yeah. And you're right. In some sense, like you can almost sum up his purpose as you might put what remained into order and appoint elders, right? And as we'll probably see, that's because of these problems. So his purpose is to address these two problems. So maybe that's do you think that makes sense, that his purpose is to appoint elders and set in order because of the problems of false teaching, ungodly living? Is that maybe a good summary, you guys think? Okay. All right. So like I hope you saw, you guys spent 10 minutes and we spent 10 minutes talking about only 20 minutes. And now we have a pretty decent view of this, right? And we didn't have to pull out study Bibles or commentaries. Now, those things could help us probably add some more color to this picture, but I just want you to see, like, you can do it. You can look at it and go, oh, I get this. And can you imagine if in your Bible reading plan, you're like, all right, I'm going to hit the book of Titus. Well, maybe the first day I'm just going to read the whole letter and just look for these things. And then tomorrow I'll start with Titus chapter 1. But now you're going to go into chapter 1 with a better context of what's going on, right?